Chapter 17 of the Jolliest School of All by Angela Brosel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17 The Anglo-Saxon League. There was an old established custom at the Villa Camelia that on the evening of the last day of March, unless that date happened to fall on a Sunday, the pupils were allowed special license after supper, and regardless of ordinary rules, might disport themselves as they pleased until bedtime. Irene, who had not yet been present on one of these occasions, heard hints on all sides of coming fun, mingled with mystery. Peachy twice began to tell her something, but was stopped by Delia. Joan and Sheila seemed to be holding perpetual private committee meetings. Elsie spent much time in Jess Cameron's dormitory, and, wonder of wonders, Esther Cartmel was seen walking arm in arm with Mabel Hughes. Though Irene asked many questions from various friends as to the nature of the evening's amusement, she could get no certain information. They laughed, evaded direct answers, made allusions to things she did not understand, and whisked away like will-o'-the-wisps. Very much puzzled, and not altogether pleased, she sought her Betty. "They've all gone mad," she assured Lorna. "I can't get a word of sense out of Peachy. Esther was almost nasty, and Jess shut the door in my face. What's the matter with them? Have I developed spots or a squint? Why have I suddenly become a leper?" Lorna, who was busy with French translation, shut her dictionary with a bang. "I've no patience with them," she groused. "It's because you're English. I suppose we shall have to get up a stunt of our own, just out of retaliation, but I'm sick of the whole business." "What do you mean?" "Why, it's become a sort of custom to make this a nationality night. The American girls all band together, and so do the South Africans and the Australians, and the Scotch girls are a tremendous clique of their own. They play jokes on everyone else, and sometimes it almost gets fighting." "Between the sororities?" "Sororities are forgotten for the time being. Your dearest chum in the camellia buds will turn against you if it's a question of Scotch or English or American or British. I advise you to put away everything you value. The South Africans came into my cubicle last year and smeared my cold cream over my pillow. Of course your bed will be filled with brushes and boots and any hard oddments they can find lying around. You won't be able to find anything in the morning. The place is an absolute muddle." "How horrid!" "Yes, it is horrid. I can't see the fun in it myself. Practical jokes can go too far, in my opinion, and some of those juniors get so rough they hurt each other. I'd keep out of it. It's wise to stay and defend your own cubicle, or you'll find your blanket hidden and your soap gone." "Do the seniors join in?" "No, they barricade themselves in their bedrooms and have some private fun, but they leave us to do as we like. It's the transition and juniors who play the tricks. Of course the seniors must know what's going on because they used to do the same themselves, but they just shut their eyes." "Oh," said Irene thoughtfully. "And because a thing has always been, must it always be? Can't it ever be altered? Are we bound to do nothing but play tricks on the last night of March?" "It ought to be altered. I've a jolly good mind to go to Rachel and tell her my views about it. She's been much nicer lately than she used to be. Perhaps she'd listen. If she doesn't, there'd be no harm done, at any rate. Will you come with me? I don't like going by my little lonesome." The two girls tapped at the door of dormitory 9 and fortunately found the head prefect within and alone. She received them quite graciously and listened with interest to what Lorna had to say. "I am so thankful you've told me," she said in reply. "I agree with you absolutely. It's time this silly business was put a stop to. We prefects have held back because we didn't want to be spoil sports, but I believe you really voiced the opinion of a good many girls. I used to get very tired of it when I was in the transition myself. If Miss Rogers found out some of the tricks that are played, she'd never let us have the holiday again. Can't we persuade them to do something else instead? Something really jolly?" "We must. I'll think about it. Leave it to me. I've been turning it over in my mind for some time, though my ideas never crystallized. I'll have some scheme ready. I can depend on you two to support me in the transition?" "Rather." Rachel, reporting the interview to her fellow prefects, found them entirely in agreement. They were dissatisfied with many things in the transition and junior forms, and this nationality evening was considered the limit. Something seemed to be needed at the present crisis to weld together the various factions of the Via Camelia and turn them into one harmonious whole. The prefects were aware that the various sororities were really rival societies, and that, though they might give great fun and enjoyment to their respective members, they were productive of jealousy rather than union. "We want a common motive," said Rachel. "An inspiration, if possible. I believe some sort of a league would do it. Something outside ourselves and bigger than just the little world of school. Something that even the smallest juniors could join, and in which girls who have left could still take an interest. It's dawning on me. I believe I've got it. I'm going to call it the Anglo-Saxon League. We'll get everybody to join and fix its first festival for the 31st of March. It should just take the wind out of those silly nationality tricks. I'll speak to Miss Rogers and ask her to let us have a parade and dance with prizes for the best costumes. They'd love that. Anyhow, I'll call a meeting in the gym and put it to them. I believe it'll catch on." The pupils at the Via Camelia were not overdone with public meetings. They responded, therefore, with alacrity to the notice which Rachel, after obtaining the necessary permission from the authorities, pinned upon the board in the hall. They were all a little curious to know what she wanted to talk to them about. A few anticipated a scolding, but the majority expected some more pleasant announcement. "Rachel's brought up, but she doesn't look like joining us," was the verdict of Peachy, who had passed the head prefect in the corridor. Some of the seniors constituted themselves stewards and arranged the audience to their satisfaction, with juniors on the front benches and the transition behind. When everybody was seated, Rachel stepped onto the platform and rang the bell for silence. Her cheeks were pink with excitement, and there was a little thrill of nervousness in her voice, as if she were forcing herself to a supreme effort. But this passed as she warmed to her subject. "Girls," she began, "I asked you to come here because I want to have a talk with you about our school life. You'll all agree with me that we love the Via Camelia. It's a unique school. I don't suppose there's another exactly like it in the whole world. Why it's so peculiar is that we're a set of Anglo-Saxon girls in the midst of a foreign-speaking country. We ourselves are collected from different continents. Some are Americans, some English, some from Australia or New Zealand or South Africa, but we all talk the same Anglo-Saxon tongue, and we're bound together by the same race traditions. Large schools in England or America take a great pride in their foundation, and they play other schools at games and record their victories. We can't do that here because there are no foreign teams worth challenging, so we've always had to be our own rivals and have form matches. In a way, it hasn't been altogether good for us. We've got into the bad habit of thinking of the school in sections instead of as just one united whole. I've even heard squabbles among you as to whether California or Cape Colony or New South Wales are the most go-ahead places to live in. Now, instead of scrapping, we ought to be glad to join hands. If you think of it, it's a tremendous advantage to grow up among Anglo-Saxon girls from other countries and hear their views about things. It ought to keep you from being narrow, at any rate. You get fresh ideas and rub your corners off. What I want you particularly to think about is this. It's the duty of all English-speaking people to cling together. If they've ever had any differences, it's time they forgot them. The world seems to be in the melting pot at present, and there are many strange prophecies about the future. Black and yellow races are increasing and growing so rapidly that they may be ready to brim over their boundaries some day and swamp the white civilizations. Anglo-Saxons ought to be prepared and to stand hand in hand to help one another. I've been reading some queer things lately. One is that a new continent is slowly rising out of the Pacific Ocean. Lemuria, they call it. And someday, hundreds of years hence, there may be land there instead of water, and people living on it. They say, too, that the center of gravity of both the British Empire and the United States is moving towards the Pacific. Sydney may grow more important than London, and San Francisco than New York, when the trade routes make them fresh pivots of energy. Another funny thing I read is that as the world is changing, a new race seems to be emerging. Travelers say that the modern children in Australia don't look in the least like English children or French children or any European nation. They are a fresh type. America has been populated by people from practically all the older countries, but I read that children who are being born there now differ in their head measurement from babies of the older races. Perhaps some of you may be interested in this, and some of you may only be bored. But what I want to rub in is that if a new and perhaps superior race is evolving, it's surely part of our work to help it on. Here we all are, girls from England, America, and British colonies, of the same race and speaking the same language. Let us make an Anglo-Saxon League and pledge ourselves that wherever we go over the face of the world, we will carry with us the best traditions. We're out for peace, not war, and peace comes through sympathy. The women of those great Eastern nations, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Hindus, who are only just awakening to a sense of freedom, will look to us Westerners for their example. Can't we hold out the hand of sisterhood to them and teach them our highest ideals so that in the centuries to come they may be our friends instead of our enemies? It's a case of take up the white man's burden. We stand together not as Scotch or Canadians or New Zealanders or Americans, but as good Anglo-Saxons, the apostles of peace, not frightfulness. I'm going to ask every girl in this room to join the League. There'll be various activities in connection with it. We haven't decided all yet, but we hope one of them will be to establish a correspondence between this school and other schools in England and the colonies and in America. We'd like to write letters to their prefect and hear what they are doing and have copies of their school magazines. It would be like shaking hands over the ocean. then why shouldn't we correspond with girls in missionary schools in India or China or Japan? Think how exciting to have letters from them and read them aloud. We should hear all about their Eastern lives and all kinds of interesting things. Well, these are faraway schemes yet that need a little time to establish. I've something much nearer to put before you. Miss Rogers has given us seniors leave to hold a fancy dress dance on the 31st of March from 7:30 to 9:30 here in the gym. We invite every girl who joins the league to come. Nationality costumes will be welcomed. There will be first, second, and third prizes for the best dresses. The judges will take into consideration the scantiness of the materials available, but they wish to announce that any girl found guilty of borrowing articles for her costume without the leave of their owners will be disqualified. And further, that any member of the league convicted of playing practical jokes will be expelled from the dance. The prefects think it wise and necessary to mention that, though the evening of March 31st has been set aside for a holiday and certain rules have been relaxed, the school is nevertheless bound to preserve its usual code of good manners, and every girl is put on her honor to behave herself. I'm sure I need not say more, for you surely understand me, and agree that when Miss Rogers has allowed us to have this fun, we ought not to abuse her kindness. Will everyone who's ready to join the league and wants to come to the dance hold up her hand? Almost every girl in the room responded to Rachel's invitation. Some, the higher-thinking ones, were attracted by the ideals of the league itself. Others were merely anxious not to be left out of the festivities. It was a long time since the school had had a fancy ball. There had been private carnivals in the dormitories, but not a public official affair at which everybody could compete in the way of dresses. Rumors spread like wildfire round the room. It was whispered that Miss Morley herself meant to come, disguised as Hiawatha, that Miss Rogers had offered a gold wristwatch as first prize, and that there were yards of gorgeous materials in the storeroom to be had for the asking. The thrill of these manifold possibilities was sufficient to eclipse the attractions of their former intentions for the evening's amusement. It was really more interesting to evolve costumes than plan tricks. Every true daughter of Eve loves to look her best, and womanhood, even in the bud, cannot withstand the supreme magnet of clothes. Little Doris Parker, South African hoyden as she was, voiced the general feeling when she confessed, "I'd meant to give those Australians a hot time of it. They may think they're stars for the league, though I'm rather glad I shan't have to tease Natalie, because she's my chum. We're both going together as Southern Hemispheres. It'll be ripping fun." The camellia buds, who had been temporarily estranged by the impending national divisions, returned to the friendly atmosphere of their sorority and lent one another garments for the fete. "It's a good thing Rachel put a stopper on commandeering," commented Delia. "Mabel was simply shameless at the carnival. Had anybody told? Sybil and Erica knew, and Rachel isn't really as blind as we thought. At any rate, she's awake now, and a far nicer prefect than she used to be. By the by, we're to draw lots as to see who may borrow out of the theatrical property box." "Oh, goody. I hope I'll win. There's a little gray dress there I've set my heart on. I'll cry oceans if I don't get it," declared Peachy. "Cheer up, old sport. If the luck comes my way, I'll try and grab it for you. I don't need anything for myself, thank goodness." "You white angel, that's what I call being a real mascot. I'll share my last dollar with you some day. Honest Injun." The contents of Miss Morley's theatrical property box, apportioned strictly by lot, did not go far among 56 girls. Miss Rogers allowed 2 of the prefects, with a teacher, to make an expedition into Fasado and rummage the shops for some yards of cheap, gay materials, imitation lace and bright ribbons, which they were commissioned to buy on behalf of certain of their schoolfellows. But most of the dancers had to contrive their costumes out of just anything that came to hand, often exercising an ingenuity that was little short of marvelous. Acting upon Rachel's suggestion, many of them personified various continents or countries. The stars and stripes of the American flag were conspicuous, and there were several red Indians with painted faces and feathers in their hair. Sheila, Mary, Esther, and Lorna repeated the costumes they had worn at the tableau, and went as representatives of Canada, South Africa, India, and New Zealand. But Peachy lent her cowboy costume to Rosamond, and turned up as Longfellow's Evangeline, in gray Puritan robe and neat white cap, a part which, though very becoming, did not accord with her mischievous twinkling eyes. "Not much Mayflower maiden in you," giggled Delia. "Why not?" asked Peachy calmly. "I guess poor Evangeline wasn't always on the weep. No doubt she had her lively moments sometimes. I'm showing her at her brightest and best. You ought to give thanks for a new interpretation of her." Winnie Duke scored tremendously by robing in skin rugs as a Canadian bear, while Joan was able to carry out a long wish or project and turned herself into a very good imitation of a kangaroo. 56 girls, arrayed fantastically in all the colors of the rainbow, made a delectable sight as they paraded round the gymnasium. The prefect had shirked the difficult and delicate task of judging, and had called Miss Rogers and Miss Morley to decree who were to receive the prizes. Perhaps they also found the decision too hard, for they chose a dozen of the best, put them to the public vote, and counted the shows of hands. Gwen Hesketh, a member of the Sixth, in a marvelously contrived Chinese costume, was first favorite. Little Cynthia West, as a delightful goblin, secured second prize, while the kangaroo, to the satisfaction of the transition, was awarded the third. The gold wristlet watch was, of course, a myth, and the rewards were trifles, but the principals had risen to the occasion sufficiently to contribute to the entertainment by providing lemonade between the dances, which, in the opinion of the girls, was a great addition to the festivities, and made the event seem more like a real party. Before they separated, the League formed an enormous circle round the room, and each clasping her neighbor's hand, all joined in the singing of Auld Lang Syne. Cowboy and Indian princess, redskin and Scotch lassie, Canadian and Jap roared the familiar chorus, and having thus worked off steam, retired to their dormitories and went to bed without breaking their pledge of good behavior. Rachel, returning from her round of supervision, heaved a sigh of immense relief. "I was dreading this evening," she confided to Sybil. "I was so afraid they'd forget their promises and begin that rowdy teasing. I believe we've broken the tradition of that, thank goodness. I hope it may never revive again. Thanks to the Anglo-Saxon League. And may that go on and flourish long after we have left the Via Camelia," added Rachel. End of Chapter 17. Read by VORich24. Chapter 18 of The Jolliest School of All by Angela Brossel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18. Greek Temples. The opening of the post bag at the Via Camelia bearing, as it did, missives from most quarters of the globe, was naturally a great daily event. Some of the girls were lucky in the matter of correspondence. Peachy received numerous letters, and others were not so highly favored. Poor Lorna was generally left out altogether. Her father wrote to her occasionally, but she had no other friend or relation to send her even a postcard. She accepted the omission with the sad patience which was her marked characteristic. Her affection for Irene had been an immense factor in her school life this term, but she was still very different from other girls, and kept her old barrier of shy reserve. Irene, noticing Lorna's wistful look towards the post-bag, often tried to share her correspondence with her buddy. She would show her all her picture postcards, briefly explaining who the writers were and to what their allusions referred. At first Lorna had only been languidly polite over them, but later she grew interested. Second-hand articles may not be as good as your own, but they are better than nothing at all, and the various items of news made topics for conversation and gave her a glimpse of other people's homes. Irene, finishing her budget one morning, sorted out any which she might hand on to her chum. "Not home letters. Yours are sacred, Mummy darling. And she wouldn't care to hear about Aunt Doreen's attack of rheumatism. There are 2 postcards she might like, and this lovely long stave from Donna. Lorna, dear, I've told you about my cousin Donna Anderson. She's at Brackenfield College. She's older than I am, but somehow we've always been such friends. I like her far and away the best out of that family. She doesn't find time to write very often because she's in the 6th and a prefect, and it keeps her busy. Besides, she never has been much of a scribbler. I haven't heard from her for months. This is ever such a jolly letter, though, if you care to look at it." "Thanks," said Lorna, accepting the offer. "Yes, I remember you told me about her. She must be rather a sport. I wish she were at the Villa Camellia instead of in England. And Donna thinks there isn't any other school in the world except hers." But Lorna opened the closely written sheets and was already reading as follows: "St. Githa's, Brackenfield College, March 30th. Rennie, dear, I've been meaning to write to you for ages. Mother told me the news of how you all packed off to Naples, and she sent me the address of your school. I do hope you like it and have settled down. I always wanted you to come to Brackenfield. You know Joan is here now. It's her first term, and she's radiantly happy. She's a clever little person at her work, and we think she's going to be great at games. Of course, she's only in New Girls' Junior team, but she's done splendidly already. Elsa was looking on yesterday and complimented her afterwards. We've had quite a good hockey season. The college played Hawthornden last week, and when the whistle went for time, the score was 4-2 in our favor. An immense triumph for us, because we've never had the luck to beat them before, and we were feeling desperate about it. They were so cocksure of winning, too. Do you get any hockey at Fossato, or is it all tennis? We'd a rather decent gymnastics display a while ago. Mona and Beatrice were very keen on gym practice, and they did some really neat balance walking on the bars, also side vaulting. The juniors gave country dances in costume, and of course that sort of thing is always clapped by parents. We are working hard now for the concert. Elsa and I have to sing a duet, and we're both terrified. Hope we shan't break down and spoil the show. I'm enjoying this year at Brackenfield most immensely. It's lovely being a prefect. I was fearfully scared when first the Empress sent for me and told me I was to be a school officer, but I've got on splendidly, thanks largely to Elsa, I think. Of course, we're still inseparable. We always have been since our first term at St. Ethelberta's, when I smuggled the mice into number 5 to scare Mona out of the dormitory and leave room for Elsa. I go nearly every week to the Tamarisks. It cheers Auntie up to see me. She's rather lonely since Elaine was married. By the by, you asked me what had become of Miss Norton's little nephew, Eric. You admired his photograph so much with those lovely golden curls. Of course they're cut off now. He's ever so much stronger and has gone to a preparatory school. I still send him books and things, and he writes me sweet letters. I'm planning to coax Mother to let me invite Norty to bring him to us for part of the summer holidays. I don't want to lose sight of the dear little chap. Now for home news. Leonard is in India and likes the life there, and Larry is at Cambridge. Peter and Cyril are still at St. Bede's and getting on well. Their letters are full of nothing but football, though. Nora's baby girl is a darling, and Michael is still very sweet, though he's growing rather an imp. You know we always describe ourselves as an old-fashioned rambling family. Well, one of us is rambling in your direction. Marjorie is making a tour in Italy with some friends of hers, the Prestons. Isn't she lucky? The last postcard she sent me was from Rome, and she said they were going on to Naples, so it's just within the bounds of possibility that you may see her. I wish I could have come out for Easter and had a peep at you. I'd like to see oranges really growing on orange trees. Perhaps Elsa is going to ask me for the holidays, though. They have a country cottage in Cornwall, and it would be top-hole there. Write and tell me about your southern school when you have time. I'd love to hear. Do you have to speak Italian there? Well, I must stop now and do my prep. There's a junior tapping at the door, too, and wanting to see me. Prefects don't get much time to themselves. With best love, your affectionate coz, Donna Anderson. What a jolly letter, commented Lorna as she handed it back. Yes, Donna is a dear. I used to want to go to Brackenfield, but I wasn't well last year, and Mother said it was too strenuous a school for me. Isn't it a joke that Marjorie is in Italy? What fun if she were to turn up some day. I have a kind of feeling that I'm going to see her. I'm getting quite excited. Lorna did not reply. Irene's correspondence was, after all, only a matter of half importance to her. Indeed, the thought of that lively family of cousins brought out so sharply the contrast of her own loneliness that she almost wished she had never heard of them. Why did other people get all the luck in life? "What's the matter? You're very glum," said Irene. "Nothing. I can't always be sparkling, can I?" "I suppose not, but I thought you'd be interested in Marjorie coming." "How can I be interested in someone I've never seen?" snapped Lorna, walking abruptly away. Irene looked after her and shook her head. "I've put my foot in it somehow," she ruminated. "You never know how to take Lorna. A thing that pleases her one day annoys her the next. She's certainly what you'd call cattywampus this morning." It was getting very near the end of the term now, and all the girls were talking eagerly about going home. Before they separated for their vacation, however, there was to be one more of Miss Morley's delightful excursions. Next term would be too hot to do much sightseeing, so those of the pupils who had not yet been shown the wonders of the neighborhood were to have a chance to visit the Greek temples at Paestum. It would be a longer expedition even than to Vesuvius, and as many were anxious to take part, it was arranged to hire a motor charter bank to accommodate about 24 girls and several teachers. The lucky ones were, of course, well drilled beforehand on the history and architecture of the place, and knew how a Greek colony had settled there about the year 600 B.C., and had built the magnificent Doric temples, which, with the sole exception of those at Athens, are the finest existing ruins of the kind. Miss Rogers had limited the excursion to seniors and transition, thinking it too long and fatiguing a day for the juniors. All the prefects were going, while the camellia buds, with the exception of Esther and Mary, who had been before, were also included in the party. "This is one thing you wouldn't get at any rate in any ordinary English school," said Lorna. "I don't suppose the Brackenfield girls are taking excursions to Greek temples." "There aren't any Greek temples in England for them to go and see, silly," laughed Irene. "Well, abbeys or castles or anything ancient. From Donna's account, that sort of thing is not in their line. They concentrate on games." "Hockey is all very well, but give me our orange groves and the blue sea." "Yes, but I sometimes hanker for a really A1 hockey match. Don't you like the Via Commedia?" "Of course I do. What's the matter, Lorna? I believe you're jealous of Brackenfield." "No, I'm not, though I'm sure I'm right in fancying you'd rather be there than here." "How absurd you are!" "Am I? All right, call it absurd if you want. Are you going to sit next to me at the char-a-banc?" Irene looked conscious. "I promised Peachy, but you can sit the other side, you know." "Oh, no thanks. If you've made arrangements already, I'm sure I don't want to interfere with them. I wouldn't spoil sport for worlds." "You are the limit." "Am I? Indeed, perhaps you'd rather not have me for a buddy any more." "For gracious sake, stop talking nonsense. You're the weirdest girl I've ever met," snapped Irene. Then, to avoid an open quarrel, she walked away, leaving her chum in the depths of misery. Lorna knew her own temper was at fault, but she was in a touchy mood and laid the blame on fate. "If I had a nice home like other girls, and had been going there for ripping holidays, and had brothers and cousins to write to me, I'd be different." She excused herself, quite forgetting that, however much she may be handicapped, the molding of our character is, after all, in our own hands. As it was, she sulked, and when the char-a-banc arrived, although Irene beckoned her to a place beside herself and Peachy, she took no notice and waited till everybody else had scrambled in. The result of this was that she finally found herself seated away from all her own friends and next to Mrs. Clark, the wife of the British chaplain, who by Miss Morley's invitation had joined the excursion. Perhaps on the whole it was just as well. Mrs. Clark was what the girls called a perfect dear, and a few hours in her company was a restful mind tonic. She had a cheery manner and chatted upon all sorts of pleasant subjects, so that after a time Lorna began to forget her jim-jams, and even to volunteer a remark or two, instead of confining her conversation to monosyllables. Certainly any girl must have been hard to please who did not enjoy herself. The motor drive was one of the loveliest in Italy. They passed through glorious scenery, all the more beautiful as it was the blossoming time of the year, and flowers were everywhere. On a marshy plain, as they reached Paestum, the fields were spangled with the little white wild narcissus. growing in such tempting quantities that Miss Morley asked the driver to stop the char-a-banc and allowed all to dismount and pick to their heart's content. "Isn't the scent of them heavenly?" said Lorna, burying her nose in the bunch of sweetness. "Luscious," agreed Mrs. Clark. "I think the old Greeks must have gathered these to weave garlands for their heads when they went to their festivals. I'm glad tourists are safe here now. This marsh, just where we're standing, used to be a tremendous haunt of brigands, and any travelers coming to see the ruins ran the chance of being robbed. My father had his purse taken years ago. Don't look frightened. The government has put all that down at last. The neighborhood of Naples has improved very much since I was a girl. I remember pickpockets used to be quite common on the quay at Santa Lucia, and nobody troubled to interfere. You can walk to the boat nowadays and carry a handbag without fearing every moment it will be snatched." But the driver was urging the necessity of pushing on, so all took their seats again, and in due course reached Paestum. The girls had, of course, seen photographs of the place beforehand, yet even those had hardly prepared them for the stately magnificence of the three great temples that suddenly broke upon their vision. Their immense size, their loneliness, far from town or city, and their glorious situation betwixt hill and blue sea, almost took the breath away, and filled the mind with a glowing admiration for the genius of Greek architecture. The rows of fluted Doric columns, tapering symmetrically towards the roof, were like beautiful lily stems supporting flowers. The mellow yellow tone of the stone was varied by the ferns and acanthus which grew everywhere around, and the sunshine, falling on the rows of delicate shafts, seemed to linger lovingly and invest them with a halo of golden light. "What must these temples have been when the world was young?" said Miss Morley. "If we could only get a glimpse of them as they were more than 2,000 years ago. Think what processions must have paced down those glorious aisles, priests and singers and worshippers all crowned with flowers. The rose gardens of Paestum used to be famous among the Roman poets. The marvel is that the stones have stood all these centuries of time. It seems as if art and beauty have triumphed over decay." The party had brought lunch baskets, and they now sat on the steps of the Temple of Neptune to enjoy their picnic. Fortunately, the grounds of the ruins were enclosed by railings, so they were preserved from the attentions of a group of beggar children who had greeted the arrival of the char-a-banc with outstretched palms and torrents of entreaties for soldi, and who were hanging about the gate, evidently waiting for any fresh opportunity that might occur of asking alms. 4 lean and hungry dogs, however, had managed to slip into the enclosure and made themselves a nuisance by sitting in front of the picnickers and keeping up an incessant chorus of loud barking. The girls tried to stop the noise by throwing them fragments of sandwiches, but their appetites were so insatiable that they would have consumed the whole luncheon and have barked for more. So Miss Morley, tired of the noise, finally chased them off the premises with her umbrella. "They're as bad as wolves, and as for the children, they're shameless. They've been taught to look upon tourists as their prey. If you go near the gate, dozens of little hands are poked through the railing, and an absolute shriek of soldi arises. It spoils people's enjoyment to be so terribly pestered by beggars, and the more you give them, the more they ask." "They're having a try at somebody else now," remarked Rachel, watching the crowd of small heads leave their vantage round the railings and surge around the carriage which drove up. "Some other tourists are coming to see the sights, 2 gentlemen and 3 ladies, Very glad I expect to show their tickets and get through the gate, out of the reach of that rabble. They're walking this way. They must be rather annoyed to find a school in possession of the place." The strangers also carried luncheon baskets, and seemed seeking a spot for a picnic. They were filing past the group on the steps when Irene suddenly sprang up. "Why, Marjorie, Marjorie!" she exclaimed joyfully. "Don't you know me?" The handsome gray-eyed girl thus addressed looked puzzled for a moment, then her face cleared with recognition. "Rennie, you've grown out of all remembrance. To think of meeting you here of all places. I'm with some friends, the Prestons. We're on a 6-week tour in Italy. I went to see your mother in Naples yesterday. What a jolly flat you have there. Isn't this absolutely glorious? I'm having the time of my life." "I should think you are, by the look of you," laughed Irene. "Donna wrote and told me you were coming to Italy, but I never expected to find you here today. If Miss Morley will let me, may I bring my lunch along and join your party for a little while? There are 10 dozen things I want to ask you." "Of course. Come and share our sandwiches. We've plenty to share." Having received the required permission, Irene went away to talk to her cousin, considerably to the admiration of most of her chums, and decidedly to the envy of one. Lorna, who had settled herself by her side on the steps, was not pleased to be deserted. She could never quite forgive Irene for having so many friends. The brooding cloud that had temporarily dispersed settled down again. When the girls got up to explore the temple, she marched glumly away by herself. All the beauty and wonder and loveliness of the scene was lost upon her. For the sake of a foolish fit of jealousy, she was spoiling her own afternoon. She was sitting upon a fallen piece of masonry, very wretched and indulging in a private little weep, when a footstep sounded on the stone pavement, and somebody came and sat down quietly beside her. It was Mrs. Clark, and she had the tact to take no notice as Lorna surreptitiously rubbed her eyes. She knew far more about the girls at the Villa Camelia than any of them suspected, and she had a very shrewd suspicion what lay at the bottom of Lorna's mind. A skilful remark or two turned the conversation on the topic of the holidays. "It's nice to go home, isn't it?" Lorna gave a non-committal grunt. "Even if you miss your friends." "I suppose so." "And it's pleasant to think they may miss you." "I don't flatter myself they'll do that," burst out Lorna. "They're so happy they never think about me." "Mrs. Clark, you don't know my home. I've nobody except my father. The others have brothers and sisters and friends, and all they want, and I have nothing." "Except your father," added Miss Clark. "How about him? Sometimes when two people are left lonely, they can make the world blossom again for one another. Isn't it time you began to take your mother's place? Can't you set yourself these holidays to give him such a bright, cheerful daughter that he'll hardly want to part with you when you go back to school? Wouldn't you rather he missed you than your chums? He's closer to you than they are. Ask yourself, if you were to lose him, is there one of your friends who could mean as much to you? I sometimes think that girls who are brought up at boarding school are apt to lose the right sense of value of their own relations. Their companions and the games fill their lives, and they go back for the holidays almost like visitors in their own homes. When they leave school, they're dissatisfied and restless, because they've never been accustomed to suit themselves to the ways of the household, and have no niche into which they can fit. The old round of camaraderie is over, and they have been trained for nothing but community life. Take my advice and make your niche now while you have the opportunity. Show your father you want him and that he's your best friend, and he'll begin to realize that he wants you. How old are you? Nearly 16. In another year or so, you should be able to live with him altogether and be the companion to him that he needs. You say you envy girls with many brothers and sisters, but there's another side to that. If you're the only child, you get the whole of the love. Remember, you're all your father has, and let him see that you care. It's a greater thing to be a good daughter than to be the favorite of the school. If you keep that object in view, you ought to have many years of happiness before you. I know. I was forgetting that side of it, said Lorna slowly. Think it over, then, for it's worth considering. A woman may have many brothers and sisters. She can have another husband, another child, but there's only one father or mother she'll get, and the bond is a close one. Is that Irene waving to us? What is she calling? We're to come on with the party. Yes, indeed, we ought to be moving along. We shall only just have time to explore the other temple before we must start back in the char-a-banc. End of chapter 18, read by VORich24. Chapter 19 of the Jolliest School of All by Angela Brazel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19. In Capri. April, the beautiful April of southern Italy, was halfway spent before the Via Commedia broke up for the holidays. There were the usual term-end examinations, at which distressed damsels with agitated minds and ink-stained fingers sat at desks furnished with piles of foolscap and cudgelled their brains to supply facts to fill in the sheets of blank paper. There was the reading out of results, with congratulations to those who had succeeded, and glum looks from Miss Rogers to those who had failed. Then followed the bringing down of boxes, the joyful flutter of packing, the last breakfast, and the final universal exodus. Goodbye, dear old thing. Do miss me a little? Hope you'll have a ripping time. Be a sport and write to me, won't you? Hold me down, somebody. I'm ready to fizz over. You won't forget me, dearie. All right, just so long as we know. Lorna, who had anticipated previous vacations as simply a relief from the toil of lessons, went home to Naples with quite altered feelings from those of former occasions. She was determined that, if it possibly lay in her power, she would make her father enjoy the time she spent with him. In spite of injustice and cruel wrong, there might surely be some happy hours together, and she would win him to live in the present instead of continually brooding over the past. The immense, terrible pathos of the situation appealed to the deepest chord in her nature. Her father was still in the prime of his years, a handsome, clever man who might have done much in the world. Was it yet too late? Lorna sometimes had faint, budding hopes that in some fresh country his wrecked career might be righted, and that he might make a new start and rise triumphant over the ruin of other days. He was glad to see her. There was no doubt about that. The knowledge that she now shared his secret placed her on a different footing. It was a relief to him to have someone in whom he could confide, someone who knew the reason for his hermit mode of living, and above all, who believed in his innocence. Insensibly, Lorna's presence acted upon him for good. The nervous, hunted look began to fade out of his eyes, and sometimes he actually smiled as she recounted the doings of the camellia buds or other happenings at school. "Daddy," she said once, "couldn't we go out to Australia or America or somewhere where nobody would know us and make a fresh life for ourselves?" A gleam of hope flitted for a moment over the sad face. "I've thought of that, Lorna. Perhaps I've been too morbid. It seemed to me that every Englishman must know of what I had been accused, and I had no credentials to offer. Now, with a 5 years' reference from the Ferroni Company in Naples, I might have a chance to have a job in Australia. It's worth considering, for your sake, child, if not for mine." During the whole of the first week of the holidays, Lorna amused herself as best she might in their little lodgings in Naples. While her father was at the office, she read and sewed or played on a wretched old piano, which had little tune in it, but it was better than nothing. The evenings were her golden times, for then they would go out together, sometimes into the Italian quarters of the city, or sometimes by tram into the suburbs, where there were beautiful promenades with views of the sea. In these walks she grew to be his companion, and instead of shrinking from him as in former days, she met him on a new footing and gave him of her best. Together they planned a home in a fresh hemisphere, and talked hopefully of better things that were perhaps in store for them over the ocean. And so life went on, and father and daughter might have realized their vision, and have emigrated to another continent where no one knew their name or their former history, and have made a fresh start and won comparative success. But Dame Fortune, who sometimes has a use for our past, however bitterly she seems to have mismanaged it, interfered again, and with fateful fingers reflung the dice. It certainly did not seem a fortunate circumstance, but quite the reverse, when the grandchildren of their landlady, who occupied the etage above their rooms, sickened with measles. Lorna had never had the complaint, and it was, of course, most important that she should not convey germs back to the Villa Camellia, so it was a vital necessity to move her immediately out of the area of infection. Signora Fiorenza, harassed but sympathetic, suggested a visit to Capri, where her sister, Signora Verdi, who owned a little orange farm and had a couple of spare bedrooms, would probably take her in for the remainder of the holidays, which would give the necessary quarantine before returning to the school. Mr. Carson jumped at the opportunity, and Lorna was told to pack her bag. "But, Daddy," she remonstrated, "I don't want to leave you. Just when we're happy together, must I run away? Do measles matter? I'd rather have them and stay here. I would indeed." "Don't be silly, Lorna. Miss Rogers wouldn't thank you to start an epidemic. Of course you must go to Capri. It's a splendid opportunity. Signora Verdi has a nice little villa. Cheer up, child. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take you myself tomorrow, stay over Sunday, and come again and spend the next weekend with you. I can get an extra day or two of holiday if I want, and the Casa Verdi is a quiet spot, quite out of the way of tourists. We can have the orange groves to ourselves and see nobody. If I catch the early boat, I'm not likely to be troubled with English trippers. That's one good business." "Daddy, you darling, oh, that would be glorious. I'd go to the North Pole if you'd come, too. 2 weekends with you in Capri? What fun! We'll have the time of our lives." To poor Lorna, who so seldom had the opportunity of enjoying family outings, this visit indeed was an event. She packed her bag joyously, and was all excitement to start. Following his usual custom of avoiding the vicinity of English people, Mr. Carson decided not to go to Capri by the ordinary steamer that conveyed pleasure seekers, but to secure passage in a cargo vessel which was crossing with supplies. To Lorna, the mode of conveyance was immaterial. She would have sailed cheerfully on a raft if necessary. She rather enjoyed the picturesque Neapolitan tramp steamer with its cargo of wine barrels and packing cases, and its crew of barefooted, red-capped seamen, talking and gesticulating with all the excitability of their southern temperament. The voyage across the blue bay was longer than that to Fassato, and she sat in a cozy nook among the casks, and watched first the white houses of Naples fading away, then the distant mountains of the coast, then the gay sails of the fishing craft that plied to and fro over the water. It was sunset when they reached the beautiful island of Capri, a pink ethereal sunset that flooded headland and rock, orange orchard and vineyard, in a faint and luminous opal glow. Their vessel anchored outside the quay of the Marina Grande, and signaled for a boat to take them off. A little skiff put out from the beach, and into this they and their luggage were transferred. The transparent crystal water over which they rode was clear as an aquarium. It was alive with gorgeous medusae, whose pink tentacles seemed to flash with the colors of the sunset. To gaze down at them was like watching a flock of sea butterflies flitting across a background of undulating green. They landed at the jetty, walked to the shore, and after securing a carriage started on a long drive uphill to the terreno of Signora Verdi. Capri, betwixt the glow of the fading sunset and the light of the rising full moon, was a veritable land of romance, with its domed eastern-looking houses set in a mass of vines and lemon trees, and the luscious scent of its many flowers wafted on the evening air. It seemed no less attractive in the morning, when, after drinking their coffee in a rose-covered arbor that stood at the bottom of their landlady's orange grove, they wandered away through the bosco and up to the open hillside. Here Flora had surely played a trick to plant golden genista against the intense sapphire blue of the Capri Sea, and she must have emptied her apron all at once to have spangled the rough grass with cistus, anemone, and starry asphodel. Below them lay a stretch of rugged rocks and turquoise bay, with no sound to break the silence but the tinkling of goat bells, or the piping of a little dark-eyed boy who practiced a rustic flute as he minded his flock. To poor Mr. Carson, wearied with the noise and clamor of Naples, it was a veritable paradise, a haven of refuge, a breathing space in the dreary pilgrimage of his sad life. On the top of this sunlit, rock-crowned islet, he gained a short period of peace and rest before he once more shouldered his heavy burden. "If I could live all my days here, Lorna, who knows, I might learn to forget," he said wistfully. "Oh, Dad, we must find a way out somehow. You can't go on like this. It's killing you. Why have we to suffer under this unjust accusation? Why should someone else do a shameful deed and shift the blame onto you? Is there no plan by which you could clear your name?" "I've asked myself that question, Lorna, through many black hours, but I've never hit on an answer." "I hate the man who's wronged you," he sobbed passionately. "Yes, I hate him, and all belonging to him. Is it wicked to hate? I can't help it when it's my own father's honor that's at stake. Oh, Daddy, if I could only get even, I'd be content. It seems so hard to let the wicked prosper and just do nothing. Why should some people have all the laughter of life and others all the tears? Lorna parted reluctantly from her father on Monday morning. He sailed by a very early boat, so that the sun had not yet risen high, as after watching his vessel leave the harbor, she turned from the marina to walk back to the Casa Verde. Half of the little town was still asleep. There were no signs of life in the hotel, where the wisteria was blooming in a purple shower over the veranda, and green shutters barred the lower windows of most of the villas. A few peasant people were stirring about. 3 dark-eyed girls, as straight as Greek goddesses, were coming down the steep path from Capri with orange baskets on their heads, and their hands full of posies of pink cyclamen. A mother with a child clinging to her yellow-bordered skirt was taking an earthenware pitcher to the well for water. A persistent bell in the little church of St. Costanzo was calling some to prayers, and others were starting the ordinary routine of the day, attending to animals, cutting salads in their gardens, spreading out fishing nets, or getting ready the hand barrows on which they sold their wares. In the gleaming morning light, the beautiful island seemed more than ever like a radiant jewel set in a sapphire sea. Lorna had left the winding highroad and was taking a short-cut up flights of steep steps between the flowery gardens of villas, where geraniums grew like weeds, and every bush seemed a mass of scented blossoms. She was passing a small, flat-topped eastern house, whose gatepost bore the attractive title of La Carina, when she suddenly heard her own name called, and, turning around, startled and surprised, what should she see peeping over the cactus hedge but the smiling face and blonde bobbed locks of Irene? The amazement was mutual. "Hello! What are you doing in Capri?" "What are you doing here?" "I'm staying up on the hill." "And we're staying in this villa." "To think of meeting you!" "Sporting, isn't it? Come inside the garden. I can't talk to you down there in the road." That her chum should actually also have come to Capri for the holidays seemed a marvelous piece of luck to Lorna. "We decided quite in a hurry," explained Irene. "Dad heard this little place was to let furnished, and took it for 3 weeks. The Camerons have taken that big pink house over there with the umbrella pine in the garden. Peachy is staying with them. Isn't it absolutely ripping? I was only saying yesterday I wish you were here too, and my cousin Marjorie Anderson and her friends are stopped at the hotel just down below. We're having the most glorious times all together. Here's Vincent. Vin, you remember meeting Lorna at school? She's actually staying in Capri." "No, don't go, Lorna. Sit down and talk. Now I've found you, I mean to keep you. We're not generally up so early, but Dad wants to catch the first steamer. He has to get back to Naples this morning." "My dad has gone already by sailing vessel." "Then you are alone? Oh, I say, you must spend most of your time with us. It's a lucky chance that has blown you our way, isn't it? We seem quite a cluster of camellia buds in Capri." So Lorna, who had expected a very quiet, not to say dull, visit at the Casa Verde during her father's absence, found herself instead in the midst of hospitable friends who extended cordial invitations to her for every occasion. "By all means let your friend join us," agreed Mrs. Beverly, in answer to her daughter's urgent request. "We've heard so much about Lorna in your letters. She seems a nice girl. I remember I was quite struck with her when I saw her at your school carnival. One more or less makes no difference for picnics. It must certainly be slow for her up here with only an Italian landlady to talk to, poor child." Capri was an idyllic place for holiday making. The beautiful climate, perfect at this season of the year, made living out of doors a delight. Every day the various friends met together and either went for excursions or passed happy hours in each other's garden. The Camerons had several young people staying with them, as well as Peachy, and the party at the hotel proved a great acquisition. This consisted of Captain Hilton Preston and his sister Joyce, their married sister Kathleen and her husband, Mr. Frank Roper, and Marjorie Anderson, who was traveling under their chaperonage. They were fond of the sea, and had at once made arrangements to hire a boat and a boatman for their visit, so that they might have as much pleasure as possible on the water during their short stay. "We shan't be able to paddle about the Mediterranean when we get home," said Captain Preston in mock tragedy. "My leave will soon be up, and I shall be off to India again. It's a case of let's enjoy while the season invites us. These rocks and bays and coves are simply magnificent. We've decided to go to the Blue Grotto today. Who cares to join us?" This was an expedition which could only be undertaken when the sea was absolutely calm. So, as even the Mediterranean may be treacherous, and sudden squalls can lash its smooth surface into waves, it was wise to take advantage of a cloudless day. "We'll start early so as to arrive there before the steamer, and have the grotto to ourselves, instead of going in with a rabble of tourists," decreed Hilton Preston. "4 boatloads of us will be a big enough party," agreed Vincent. "They say the best light is at about 11. The group of friends therefore set off from the marina in their various craft. The row along the base of the precipitous craggy shore was most beautiful. The water swarmed with gaily colored sea stars and jellyfish, and on the rocks at the edge of the waves grew gorgeous madrepores and other frutti di mare. The Blue Grotto is one of the wonders of Italy, but to explore it is not a particularly easy matter, for its entrance is scarcely 3 feet in height. "My, have we got to squeeze under there?" exclaimed Peachy wonderingly, looking at the tiny space at the foot of the crag through which they would be obliged to pass. "Not in these boats, of course," said Vincent. "The skiffs are waiting, and if we just leave it to the boatmen, they'll show us how to manage." The tiny craft that were in readiness for visitors now came forward, and the party was transferred to them. 3 passengers were taken in each skiff, and were required to lie flat on their backs in the bottom of the boat. The boatman paddled to the entrance of the grotto. Then, also lying on his back, he directed the skiff into a low passage, working his way along by pulling at a chain which was fastened to the roof of the rocky corridor. In a short space of time they shot into an enormous cavern, 175 feet in length and over 40 feet in height. Here for a moment or two all seemed dazzled, but as their bewildered vision gradually grew accustomed to the light, they saw that everything in the grotto, walls, sea, or any objects, appeared of a heavenly blue color. The faces of their friends, their own hands, the water when they scooped it up and dropped it again, all were turned to sapphire, while articles under the sea gleamed with a beautiful silver shade. The girls bared their arms and enjoyed dipping them to obtain this effect. The glorious blue of the cave was indescribable. "I feel like a mermaid at the bottom of the ocean," exulted Peachy. "Or a cherub in the sky," said Jess. "Why is it blue, though?" asked Lorna. "Because of the refraction of light," explained Mrs. Beverly from the next boat. "We see a kind of concentrated reflection of the sky sent to us under the sea. If it were a gray day outside, it would be gray in here, too." "Some people think that the Mediterranean has risen and that once the water in this grotto was much lower, so that boats could sail in and out of it quite easily. Do you see that landing place over there? It leads to some broken steps and a blocked-up passage that tradition says wound up through the cliff right to the villa of Tiberius. Perhaps it was a secret way by which he thought he might escape if danger threatened him. "How I'd love to explore it," sighed Irene. "It only goes a little way before it is blocked. It's hardly worth landing to look at. Be careful, Rennie. If you lean over the edge of the boat so far, you'll be upsetting us, and although we might look very delightful and silvery objects under the water, I'm not at all anxious to offer myself for the experiment." "Why don't they enlarge the entrance?" asked Vincent. "Because nobody is sure whether by doing so they might or might not spoil the beautiful effect of the blue light in the grotto. It's too risky a venture to try. Besides, in present conditions, the boatmen make a great deal of money by taking tourists into the grotto. If it were very easy to get in, they could not charge so much. It's a little mine of wealth to the Capri fisherfolk now, though years ago they used to say the place was haunted, and tell terrible tales about it. They said fire and smoke had been seen issuing from the entrance, that creatures like crocodiles crept in and out, that every day the opening expanded and contracted 7 times, that at night the sirens sang sweetly there, that any young fishermen who ventured to sail near disappeared and were never seen again, and that the place was full of human bones." "What a gruesome record," declared Vincent. "I agree with Rennie, though. I'd like to explore that passage with a strong bicycle lamp or an electric torch. Who knows what we might find if we looked about? A coin that Tiberius had dropped out of his pocket? Or one of the siren's hairpins? Or a crocodile's tooth, at least? Yes, I may positively come again, Matter, just to prove the truth of your stories." "Silly boy," laughed his mother. "I expect every stone of this place has been well turned over in search of treasure. Trust the fisher people not to lose a chance. Now our stay here's limited by the official's tariff to a quarter of an hour, and if we stop any longer we shall have to pay our dues a second time. If you're ready, so am I. Tell the first boat to go on. Don't forget we must lie on our backs again to scrape through the entrance." End of Chapter 19. Read by VORich24. Chapter 20 of The Jolliest School of All by Angela Brazel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. The Cameron Clan. Lorna had never realized before how much of life can be compressed into a few days. The interval between her father's departure for Naples and his return for the weekend was spent almost entirely with her friends. It marked for her an altogether new phase of existence. She had read in books about jolly families of brothers and sisters and parties of young people, but her own experience was strictly limited to school. Here in Capri, for the first time, she tasted the delights of which she had often dreamed, and found herself cordially included in a charmed circle. Though the Beverleys were mainly responsible for thus taking her up, the Camerons also offered much kindness. The Cameron clan, as they called themselves, consisted of father, mother, Jess, and 2 brothers, Angus and Stuart, and almost every evening the young folk would meet at their villa and gather round a wood fire in the salon. Though the days were so warm, the nights were chilly, and it was cheerful to watch the blazing logs. What times they had together! It was an established rule that everybody contributed some item to the general entertainment, and in spite of fierce denials, even the least accomplished were compelled to perform. It brought out quite unexpected talent. Peachy, who had always declared her music wasn't up to anything, charmed the company by lilting darky melodies or pathetic Indian songs. Captain Preston remembered conjuring tricks which he had learned in India. Mr. Roper proved a genius at relating short stories, and Mrs. Cameron could recite old ballads with the fervor of a medieval minstrel. The walls of the Italian salon seemed to melt away and change to a wild moorland or a northern castle as she declaimed Fair Helen of Kirkconnell, The Lament of the Border Widow, Bartram's Dirge, or Braes o' Yarrow. Modern people want more poetry in their veins, she insisted. I've no patience with the stuff most of them read. There's more romance in one of those stories of ancient times than you'd find in a whole box full of the latest library books. People weren't ashamed of their feelings then, and they put them into beautiful words. Nowadays, it seems to me, they've neither the feelings nor the language to clothe them in. I'm a century or two too late. I ought to have lived when the world was younger. If his wife adored her native ballads, Mr. Cameron, on his part, had a good stock of Scottish songs, and would trill them out in a fine baritone voice, the audience joining with enthusiasm in the choruses of such favorites as Bonnie Dundee, Charlie is My Darling, and Over the Sea to Sky. There's a ring about Jacobite melodies that absolutely grips you, said Mrs. Beverly, begging for Why I'd Ya Not Fought for Charlie and Farewell Manchester. Perhaps it's in my blood, for my ancestors were Jacobites. One of them was a beautiful girl in 1745, and sat on a balcony to watch her prince ride into Fairchester. The cavalcade came to a halt under her window, and Charlie looked up and saw her, and asked her to dance at the ball that was being given that night in the town. She was greatly set up by the honor, and handed the tradition of it down to the family as something that must never be forgotten. Oh, I'd have fought for the island laddie myself if I'd been a man in his days. Is the spirit of personal loyalty dead? We give patriotic devotion to our country, but love such as that of an ancient Highlander for his hereditary chief seems absolutely a thing of the past. While their elders entertained the circle with northern legends of border ballads, the young people also did their share and contributed such choice morsels as ghost stories, adventures in foreign lands, or weird tales of the occult. Stuart, who was an omnivorous reader of magazines, tried to demonstrate the romance of modern literature, though he could never convince his mother of its equality with old-world favorites. Marjorie Anderson, who had a sweet voice, loved soldier ditties, and caroled them much to the admiration of Captain Preston, who always managed to contrive to get a seat near her particular corner of the fireside. "I believe those two are a match," whispered Peachy to Irene one evening. "So do I. They met first when Marjorie was at school. Donna told me all about it, and it was quite romantic. They'd have seen more of each other, only after the armistice, his regiment was ordered out to India. He's home on leave now. He wrote to Marjorie all the time he was away, regularly. She's tremendous friends with his sisters, and they asked her to join them on this tour. Looks suspicious, doesn't it?" "Rather. I hope it will really come off," answered Peachy, looking sympathetically at the attractive pair whose chairs always seemed to gravitate together. She's pretty, and his brown eyes are the twinkliest I've ever seen. Yes, I'm prepared to give him my blessing. I only wish he'd get on with it. Why doesn't somebody give him a push over the brink and make him propose? He's marking time, and for 2 cents I'd tell him so myself. I guess his eyes would pop out, but I shouldn't care. Don't be alarmed. I promise I won't interfere. But onlookers see the most of the game, and with an affair like this under my very nose, I'd be mad if they don't fix it up. Captain Preston was hardly likely to conduct his love-making under full fire of inquisitive eyes, but he generally managed to appropriate Marjorie on walks or excursions. They strolled out together to admire the moon, hunted for orchids on the hills, searched the beach for shells, and saw enough of one another's society to satisfy the most ardent matchmakers. It was an established fact that these two should always sit together in boat or carriage, but the rest of the party revolved like a kaleidoscope. Lorna sometimes found herself escorted by Stuart or Angus, sometimes by Charlie or Michael Ford, the friends who were staying with them, and oftener still by Vincent Beverley, whose fair hair, blue eyes, and merry face, so like Irene's, specially attracted her. She was so unaccustomed to have a cavalier at all that it seemed wonderful to her that anyone should take the trouble to carry her basket, pick flowers that grew out of her reach, help her up difficult steps, or hand her into a rocking boat. This new aspect of the world was very sweet. Insensibly it affected her. "Lorna's growing so pretty," commented Peachy to Irene. "She's a queer girl. At school she goes about looking almost plain and as dreary as an owl. She's suddenly jumped into life here. Anybody who hadn't seen the two sides of her wouldn't believe the difference. When she's animated, she's nearly beautiful." "I don't think she's ever been really appreciated at the Via Camellia," replied Irene. "Mums like her immensely. She says there's so much in her, and that she only wants mothering to bring her out. As for Vin, his head's turned. He's made me vow faithfully to engineer that he sits next to Lorna in the boat today." "Are you going with Stuart?" "Well, I've promised Michael, if he's a particularly good boy, I'll let him row me in the little skiff. I dare say Charlie will be angry, but I can't help it. The Fords are as alike as buttons in looks, but the younger one is so infinitely nicer than the other." Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday had slipped blissfully by, except for the few hours daily during which the steamer from Naples visited Capri, with promenade deck filled with tourists. The little island was wonderfully quiet, and by keeping away from the Marina Grande or the high roads, it was possible to avoid other holiday-makers. If they were not on the sea, the clan, as the whole party liked to call themselves, generally went to the hills to escape civilization. The natives had begun to know them, and though they might be offered oranges, figs, or dates by street vendors, they were not continually pestered to take carriages, engage guides or donkeys, or buy picture postcards or long strings of coral. Irene loved occasional excursions into the white town on the rock. The strict rules and convent seclusion of the Via Camellia had given her no opportunity of sampling shops at Fossato, so except for her half-term holidays at Naples, this was her first experience of marketing in Italy. The unfamiliar money and measures were, of course, confusing, but the quaint little cakes, the lollipops wrapped in fringed tissue paper of gay colors, the sugar hearts, the plaited baskets, the inlaid boxes, the mosaic brooches, the beads, and the 101 cheap trifles spread forth on stalls or in windows, fascinated her. and drew many lire from her purse. She only knew a few words of colloquial Italian, but she used these to the best advantage, and made up the rest with nods and smiles, a language well understood by the kindly people of Capri, to whom a gesture is as eloquent as a whole sentence. Vincent, whose talents ran more towards prowess at football than a gift for languages, would often escort his sister, and conducted his bargaining by pointing to what he wanted and counting the price in lire on his 5 fingers, an operation that caused fits of amusement to the shopkeepers, with whom the fair young Englishman became quite a favorite. As long as Vincent could see what he wished for on sale, and indicated it with a finger, he got along all right. But matters grew complicated if he tried to explain himself. One day his mother, having run short of methylated spirit for her tea-kettle, sent him with a bottle to buy some more. He looked the words up in the dictionary, entered a chemist's, and demanded alcohol for burning in his best Italian. The assistant seemed mystified, but suddenly a light flooded his intelligent face. He flew to a series of neat little drawers behind the counter, rummaged about, and in much triumph produced an Alcock's porous plaster, which he vehemently assured Vincent would be sure to burn, and was a real English medicine, imported with great trouble and expense, and certain to cure the ailment from which he was suffering. How Vincent would have got out of the tangle, or convinced the chemist's assistant that he was not in need of medical aid, is uncertain. But at that moment Irene, who was walking with Lorna in the square, spied him through the window, and brought her chum to the rescue. Lorna's Italian was excellent. She soon unravelled the matter, returned the porous plaster to the disappointed assistant, and explained to Vincent that the local name for methylated spirit was spirito, and that it was generally procured from an oil colorman's. "How was I to know?" grumbled Vincent dramatically. "A fellow goes by the dictionary. It's always called alcohol in Rome, and in some other places," pacified Lorna, who was still laughing at the mistake. "And I've bought it at a chemist myself in Naples. Come along round the corner, and we'll find the right shop. I had my own bottle filled there yesterday, so I know where to go." On the Friday, Mrs. Cameron, who by universal consent had constituted herself organizer of the various joint expeditions, sent out invitations for a grand gathering of the clan to go and view the ruins of the Villa of Tiberis. This was one of the principal sights of the island, and as the Preston party were not staying over the following week, it would have seemed a pity for them to miss it. "It's a case of taking nose-bags and going for the day," said Stuart, delivering his message to the various villas. "Meeting place, the piazza in the town. Those who like to come by the funicular can do so. We'll wait for them. I think the mater will take the train and save herself some of the climb. She doesn't like these endless steps, and it's certainly a pull from the place to the town. It's worthwhile walking down to the marina to get to the railway." Mrs. Beverley, Mrs. Roper, and Joyce Preston joined Mrs. Cameron in taking advantage of the little ferrovia funiculare that connected the harbor with the town, and arrived at the piazza cool and fresh compared with those who had preferred to toil up the steep path. "I told you to come with me, Rennie, child," chided Mrs. Beverley. "Look how hot you are already. You'll be quite overdone before we get to the summit." "Oh, Mums, darling, I'm not tired. I've saved the fare and bought this swanky little cane instead. Look, isn't it dinky?" protested Irene, proudly exhibiting her newly purchased treasure. "It has a leather strap and a tassel and a knob that one can suck." "You baby," laughed her mother. "We shall have to buy you a tin trumpet, I don't believe you're out of the nursery yet." "Tin trumpet, Mum's darling? Oh, you've given me such an idea," purred Irene, running to Michael forehead and whispering some communication into his sympathetic ear, which caused him to walk back to a certain street stall and purchase 9 tin whistles, with which the younger members of the party armed themselves and immediately began a desperate attempt to produce the bluebells of Scotland, hugely to the entertainment of the natives, who flocked to their doors all smiles and amused exclamations. "Bairns, I think shame of you," declared Mrs. Cameron. "They'll take us for a wandering circus. Put those unmusical instruments in your pockets till we clear the town. I never heard a poor Scottish air so mangled. You may practice your band on the hills and scare the goats. Don't play it in my ears again till you catch the proper tune." The musicians, after their first burst of enthusiasm was expended, were glad to save their breath for the climb. When houses were left behind, their way wound between high walls, up, up, along a paved pathway among orange groves, till at last the allotments disappeared, and they were on the open hillside, among the low shrubs and the rough grass and the beautiful flowers. Irene, running up a bank in quest of Bjorkesses, broke her new cane into 4 pieces, but was somewhat consoled by a stick which Michael cut her from a chestnut tree. "It hasn't a knob to suck," he laughed, "but I'll tie a stick of peppermint on the end of it if you like." "Don't tease me, or I'll throw a squashy orange at you." "I thought you were fond of peppermint." "So I am, and if there's another of those creamy Neapolitans left in your pocket, I'll accept it and forgive you." "Right you are, O Queen. There are 2 here. Does your Majesty prefer a purple paper or a green?" The ruins which formed the goal of their expedition were the remains of a once splendid villa erected by the Emperor Tiberius and used constantly by him until his death in A.D. 37. Most of the party were disappointed to find them, as Peachy expressed it, "so very ruiny." It was difficult to picture what the original palace must have been like, and nothing was left of all the grandeur but crumbling walls, over which nature had scattered ferns and flowers. At the very top, some of the old masonry had been used to build a tiny church. This was closed, but peeping through the grill in the door, the visitors could catch glimpses of blue-painted roof and of little model ships, placed as votive offerings by the sailors in gratitude for preservation from the danger at sea. Outside this chapel was a great stone monument built so near the edge of the cliff that when sitting on its steps one could look down a sheer drop of several hundred feet into the blue waters below. The view from here was magnificent, and as the clan in turn scanned the neighboring coast of Italy with field glasses, they believed they could even distinguish the Greek temples at Paestum. The girls described the glorious excursion they had taken there from school. "You were lucky to be able to go all the way by Charabanc," commented Mrs. Cameron. "Dad and I went there on our honeymoon years and years ago, and traveled all the way from Naples by a terrible little jolting train that carried cattle trucks and luggage trucks as well as passenger carriages. I shan't ever forget that journey. We had to leave the station at 6:30, and when we came downstairs we found it was a pouring wet day. It was only the fact that the sleepy-looking waiter at our hotel must have roused himself at 5 a.m. to prepare our coffee, and that we did not like to ask him to do it again another morning, that forced us to set off on the train. I never felt so disinclined for an excursion in my life. Dad said afterwards if I had given him the least hint, he'd have joyfully relinquished it, but each thought the other wanted to go, so off we set. All the way to Cava it simply streamed, and we sat in our corners of the carriage secretly calling ourselves idiots and wondering how we were going to look over temples in a deluge. But our heroism was rewarded, for just as the train crossed the Brigand's Marsh, the rain stopped and the sun shone out, and the effect of blue sky and clouds was simply glorious. We had a great joke at Paestum. A mosquito had stung me badly on one lid so that I looked as if I had a black eye. It was most uncomfortable and painful, I remember. Well, a party of French tourists were going round the temples, and as they passed us they glanced at my eye and then at Daddy. A husband of 3 weeks standing, and they murmured something to one another. I couldn't catch their words, but quite plainly they were saying, "Oh, these dreadful English, he's evidently given her a black eye, poor thing. That's how they treat their wives." The French people went on to the second temple, and Dad and I sat down to eat our lunch. We were fearfully annoyed by dogs that sat in front of us and watched every mouthful, and barked incessantly. "Did they trouble you too? How funny. They must surely be the descendants of our dogs who've inherited a bad habit." Dad got so utterly exasperated that he said he must and would get rid of them. So he seized my umbrella, shook it furiously at them, and yelled "Va via!" in the most awful and blood-curdling voice he could command. Just at that moment the French tourists came back round the corner. They turned to one another with nods of comprehension, as if they were saying, "There, didn't I tell you so? See what a brute he really is?" And they cast the most sympathetic glances at me as they filed by. "Isn't that true, Daddy?" Mr. Cameron lazily removed his cigarette. "It's a stock story, my dear, that you've told against me for the last 20 years. I won't say that it's not exaggerated. Go on telling it if you like. My back's broad enough to bear it. Shall I return good for evil? Well, as I walked through the town today, waiting till you came up by the funicular, I saw one of the Tarantella dancers, and I engaged the whole troupe to come to the house tonight to give us a performance. You said you wanted to see them. Will our friends here honor us with their company and help to act audience?" It seemed an appropriate ending to such a delightful day, and all the party readily accepted the invitation. After twilight fell, they assembled at the Camerons' villa, and took their places in the salon, which had been temporarily cleared of some of its furniture. The Tarantella dancers, who were accustomed to give their small exhibition to visitors, brought their own orchestra with them, a thin youth who played the violin, a stout individual who plucked the mandolin, and an enthusiast who twanged the guitar. The performers were charmingly dressed in the old native costumes of the country, the men in soft white shirts, green sleeveless velvet coats, red plush knickers, silk stockings, and shoes with scarlet bows, while the girls wore gay skirts, striped sashes, lace ficus, and aprons, and gold beads round their shapely throats. They danced several sprightly measures, waving tambourines and rattling castanets, or twining silk scarves together, while the musicians fiddled and strummed their hardest. Then 6 of them stood aside, and the 2 principal artists advanced to do a star turn. Romeo sang an impassioned love song with his hand on his heart, while Juliet plucked at her apron and appeared doubtful of the truth of his protestations. Then the funny man had his innings. He sat in a chair with a shoe in his hand and tried to smack the head of a humorist who knelt in front but always managed neatly to avoid his blows. The whole being punctuated by vigorous exclamations in Italian and much energetic music from the orchestra. A pretty girl sauntered next onto the scene and sang, in a rather peacock voice, a little ditty lamenting the weather, at which a velvet-coated cavalier came in to the rescue, and chanting his offer of help sheltered her with a huge green umbrella, under which they proceeded to make love and finally executed a dance beneath its friendly shade. The whole of the little performance was very graceful and attractive, savoring so thoroughly of southern Italy, and showing the courteous manners and winning smiles to the utmost advantage. The dancers themselves seemed to have enjoyed it, and stood with beaming faces as they bowed their adieu and thanked the audience for their kind attention. "Aren't they just too perfect?" commented Peachy. "I want to wear a velvet bodice and green skirt with a yellow border. I want to dance the tarantella with a tambourine in my hand." "Won't a two-step content you?" said Angus. "Mater says since the room is cleared we may as well finish with a little hop ourselves. May I have the pleasure? Thanks so much. Mrs. Beverley's going to play for us. It's a beast of a piano, but it's good enough to dance to. We mustn't notice if the bass is out of tune." End of Chapter 20, read by VORich24. Chapter 21 of The Jolliest School of All by Angela Brazel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 21. The Blue Grotto. Very early on Saturday morning Mr. Carson returned to Capri in a sailing vessel, having taken advantage of a night crossing and arriving with the dawn. Lorna had bidden her friends a temporary good-bye for the week-end, refusing all kind invitations of "bring your father to see us," or "tell him he must join the clan." She felt that her excuses for him were of the flimsiest. She said he was tired, unwell, and needed absolute rest and solitude, and begged them to forgive her if she spent the time with him alone, and though they replied that they could understand his desire for quiet, she was conscious that they thought she might at least have volunteered an introduction. Lorna knew only too well that if her father was aware there was the slightest danger of meeting English people, he would probably insist upon taking the next boat back to Naples. It was the consciousness of complete isolation that gave the value to his holiday. She told him, indeed, that she had met some of her school friends and had taken walks with them, but she mentioned that they were staying down below, nearer the marina, and that they were not in the least likely to come up to the Casa Verde. "Let us take our books, Daddy," she suggested, "and go and sit on the hillside as we did last Sunday. It was quiet on that ledge of the crag and away from everybody. The rest did you good, and I'm sure you enjoyed it." Lying on the cliff among the flowers, with blue sky above and blue sea beneath, poor Mr. Carson allowed himself a temporary relaxation. He smoked his pipe and read his paper, and for a little while at least the hard lines round his mouth softened, and his anxious eyes grew easy. He finished his Italian journal, lay idly watching the scenery, chatted, dozed, and finally stretched out his hand for one of Lorna's books. It happened to be an anthology of poetry which Irene had lent her, and which contained one of the ballads that Mrs. Cameron had recited to the assembled clan. It had struck Lorna's fancy, and she was trying to learn it by heart. Mr. Carson turned over the pages, read a few of the pieces, and was closing the little volume when his eyes chanced to light upon the name written on the title page. Its effect upon him was like a charge of electricity. "David Beverley!" he gasped. "David Beverley! Lorna! Great heavens! By all that is sacred! Where did you get this?" "Why, Dad, what's the matter? Irene lent me the book. It belongs to her father." "Her father? You don't mean to tell me your friend's father is David Beverley?" "Why not, Dad?" whispered Lorna, looking with apprehension into his haggard, excited face. She guessed even before he spoke what the answer was going to be. "David Beverley is the man who ruined my life." The blow which had fallen was utterly overwhelming. For a moment Lorna fought against the knowledge like a drowning man battling with the waters. "Oh, Dad, surely there's some mistake. It can't be. Isn't it some other Beverley, perhaps?" "I know his writing only too well. There's no possibility of a mistake. Besides, I saw him in Naples at the end of February. I haven't forgotten the shock it gave me. Why," turning almost fiercely upon Lorna, "didn't you tell me your schoolfellow's name before? Have you all this time been making friends with your father's enemy?" "I thought I'd often talked about Rennie," faltered poor Lorna. "Perhaps I never mentioned her surname. Oh, Dad, is it really true? It's too horrible to be believed." Lying in the soft Capri grass, with the pink cistus flowers brushing her hot cheeks, Lorna raged impotently against the tragedy of a fate which was changing the dearest friendship of her life into a feud. Irene, the only one at school who had sympathized and understood her, who had behaved with a delicacy and kindness such as no other person had ever shown her, who had taken her into her home circle and given her the happiest time she had ever had in her shattered girlhood. Irene, with her merry gray eyes and her bright sunny hair, the very incarnation of warm-hearted, genuine affection. Irene, her roommate, her buddy, her chosen confidant. How was it possible ever to regard her as an enemy? Yet had she not vowed a solemn oath to hate all belonging to the man who had so desperately injured them? Oh, the world seemed turning upside down. Loyalty to her father and love for her friend dragged different ways, and in the bitter conflict her heart was torn in two. Mr. Carson, haunted to the verge of insanity by the terror of discovery, was now obsessed with the one idea of escape from Mr. Beverley. He no longer felt safe on the island. Any moment he dreaded to meet faces that would betray recognition of his past. The calm and content of his visit were utterly shattered, and a sudden violent impulse urged him to return to Naples. "Capri is not large enough to hold myself and David Beverley," he declared. "We'll go back by the night boat, Lorna. Meantime, you will borrow Signor Verdi's skiff and paddle about among the rocks. I feel easier on water than on land. I like the sense of a space of ocean round me. You can't suddenly meet a man when you've plenty of sea room, can you?" "No, Dad," said Lorna, trying to soothe him. "We can walk down the steps to the cove and get the skiff, and be quite away from everybody once we're on the sea." She was ready to humor his every whim, for in the blackness of her trouble nothing seemed at present to really matter. The whirling eddies of her thoughts rushed through her brain in a perpetual series of questions and answers. Must hate strike the death knell of love? Surely the only thing to do with an injury is to forgive it. Would revenge wipe out the wrong or in any way solve anything? No, there would only be one more wrong done in the world, to go on in ever-widening circles of hatred and misery. Curses, like chickens, come home to roost, and getting even may bring its own punishment. "Our only chance is to go away and start afresh in a new country," she sobbed. "At the other side of the Pacific we might forget. But no, Rennie, If I go to the back of beyond, I shan't forget you and all you've been to me. The memory of you, darling, will last until the end of my life." Mr. Carson found Signor VORich working in his allotment, obtained leave from him to use the skiff, and, climbing down the flight of steps cut in the rock, reached the cove where the boat was beached on the shingle. He had been an expert oarsman from his college days and understood Neapolitan waters, so in a short time he and Lorna were skimming gently over the surface of the blue sea, keeping well away from the rocks and out of currents, but within reasonable distance of the land. Sometimes they rowed and sometimes they drifted, hardly caring in what direction they steered so long as they circled round the island. Their only object was to stop out on the sea, and as they had brought a picnic basket with them, there was nothing to urge their return until sunset. In the course of the afternoon they had coasted below Monte Solaro, and found themselves approaching the entrance that led to the Blue Grotto. In the mornings, when the steamer brought its crowd of tourists, there was generally quite a little fleet of skiffs to be seen here. But now, with the exception of a solitary boat, the famous cavern was deserted. To avoid passing too near to even this one craft, Mr. Carson steered away from the shore, but turned his head in consternation, for loud and unmistakable cries of help were ringing over the water, and the occupants, frantically waving handkerchiefs, were evidently doing their utmost to attract his attention. Common humanity demanded that he must at least go and see what was the matter, so he reluctantly altered his course. In a boat close to the entrance of the grotto were several young people, and Lorna instantly recognized Angus, Stuart, Jess, Michael, and Peachy. They appeared in such anxiety, and directly they were within hailing distance they called out their news. "Mr. Beverly and Vincent and Irene have gone inside the grotto, and they don't seem to be able to get out again. We can hear them shouting for help." The party, in their British imprudence, had not brought a boatman, and they were uncertain what to do. Their own bark was too large to go through the narrow opening into the cavern, and they looked hopefully at Mr. Carson's little skiff. "We don't know what's happened," gulped Jess. "They went in to explore the Roman passage, just by themselves." "They've been gone such a long time," volunteered the others. "Listen," said Peachy. For from out the low entrance of the grotto floated a faint, far-off, echoing ghost of a shout. Lorna glanced imploringly at her father. He did not hesitate for a moment. The man who had injured him was inside the cavern, perhaps in deadly danger, and he was going to risk his own life and his daughter's to save him. And risk there undoubtedly was. A breeze had risen and agitated the surface of the water, so that the ingress was smaller than ever and more difficult to compass. When waves lashed the tideless Mediterranean, even the Capri fishermen shunned entering the grotto, for they knew its perils only too well. Telling Lorna to lie flat on her back, Mr. Carson took the same position, and with infinite difficulty managed to maneuver the skiff into the rocky entrance. There was barely room, for each wave bumped against the roof, but by clinging to the chain he worked his way along and shot through into the lake within. On the right of the cavern 3 figures, holding a light, stood on a kind of landing place, while a skiff drifting far off in the shadows told its own tale. Mr. Carson rowed at once to retrieve the truant boat and towed it back to its owners. "We thought we had tied it securely," explained Mr. Beverly. "We were utterly aghast when we came back and found it had drifted. It would have been a horrible experience to stay here all night. If the sea rose, we might even have been imprisoned for days. We were fools to come, but I didn't realize the danger." "The sea is much rougher already," said Mr. Carson. "It'll be a ticklish matter to get out again, and the sooner we do it the better. Will you go first, and I'll follow on after?" "It's like you, Lorna, to come to rescue us." I always called you my good angel, joked Irene, as she entered the skiff. I thought just now I was never going to see you again in this world. Let's get out of this horrible place as fast as we can. It's like Dante's Inferno. I've never been so frightened in all my life. One after the other, the two skiffs started on their risky exit from the grotto, scraping and bumping against the roof within the water on a level with the gunwale. One wave indeed overflowed and soused them, but the next moment they sighted the sky, and grazing through the entrance, they gained the open water. It was only when, in the clear afternoon daylight, he turned to thank his rescuer that a flash of recognition flooded Mr. Beverley's face. "Cedric Houghton! You! He stammered, as if almost disbelieving the evidence of his own eyes. "Yes, it is I, but having seen me, forget me," returned Mr. Carson, his dark face flushed and his hand on the oar. "It's the one favor you can do me for saving you. Let me vanish as I came, and don't try to follow me. I only hope we may never cross each other's paths again." "Cedric, come back!" yelled Mr. Beverley as the skiff shot away. "Man alive, we've been searching for you for years. Don't you know that we've proved your innocence? Come back, I say, and let me tell you." It was late that evening, after a very long talk with Mr. Beverley, that Lorna's father explained to her the circumstances that had cleared his name. David had no more embezzled the money than I, and, thank God, he had no idea I ever distrusted him. When a further sum went, Mr. Fenton set a trap, and discovered to his infinite grief that it was his own son who had been robbing the firm. It practically broke him, and he has retired from all active share in the business now. They packed young Fenton off to New Zealand and to try farming instead of finance, but he's not doing any good there. Mr. Fenton, it seems, was most anxious to find me and right the injustice done me, but I had hidden myself so well under an assumed name in Naples that it was impossible for them to trace me. They advertised in the agony column of the Times, but I avoided English papers, so never saw the advertisements. My efforts to escape notice were only too successful, and although I didn't know it, I was actually defeating my own ends by my caution. If, as I had intended, I had started for a new continent, I might so completely have broken all links with my old life that I might have gone to my grave in ignorance that my innocence was proved. It was only the marvelous chance of this afternoon's meeting that cleared up the tangle. I can look the world in the face again now, and not fear the sight of an Englishman. Oh, the joy of having one's honor back untarnished! Next best to that is to know it was not my friend who had wronged me. The belief in his treachery was half the bitterness of those dreadful years. Capri has been a fortunate island for us, Lorna. It's truly called the mascot of Naples, and I shall love it to the end of my days. I can take my old name again now, and be proud of it. You're Lorna Houghton in future, not Lorna Carson. What a triumph to write to our relations and tell them the glorious news. I feel like a man let loose from slavery. To Lorna also this happy consummation of all their troubles seemed a relief almost too great for expression. That Irene, her own Rennie, should be the daughter of her father's favorite friend, and therefore a hereditary as well as a chosen chum, was a special delight, for it welded the links that bound them together. The future shone rosy, and she felt that wherever her life might be cast, the Beverleys would always remain part and parcel of it. Perhaps the triumph she appreciated most of all was the introduction of her father to the Cameron clan. No more hiding in out-of-the-way corners and avoiding the very sound of a British voice. Henceforth they might hold up their heads with the rest and take again their true position. She was proud of her father, now that the black cloak of despair had dropped away from him. His old, happier nature shone out, and he seemed suddenly 10 years younger. To present him into the intimate circle of her friends realized her dearest wish. "It's been a wonderful weekend," said Peachy, standing with her girl-friends on the quay to wave goodbye to the Monday morning steamer that bore some of their relations back to Naples and business. "Here's Lorna with a new name, and Rennie with a fresh cousin. Haven't you heard? Why, Captain Preston popped the question last night, and he and Marjorie announced their engagement at the breakfast table. Not the most romantic place to glean up congratulations, but, of course, that's just as you think about it. When I get engaged, it shall be announced by moonlight, so that I can hide my blushes. I don't ever want the holidays to end. Capri's the dandiest place in Italy, and if Dad doesn't buy a villa here, I'll never forgive him. You want one too, Lorna? Hooray! We'll make a colony of camellia buds on the little island and spend the summer here. We may be globe-trotters and all the rest of it, but I vote we get up a good old Anglo-Saxon League and stick together for a better or for a worse. I'll buy a Union Jack today if the Cameron clan will promise to wave the stars and stripes and sing Yankee Doodle and Auld Lang Syne. We've welded America already into the clan, dear Baron," smiled Mrs. Cameron. "No other visitor keeps us alive like you do." "Pronounce thy wishes, O Peach of the West," laughed Stuart. "We rechristen thee Queen of the South. Then I summon you all some day to come back to this, my kingdom by the sea. School is school, and I've got to have another term there, but I want to feel this happy island is waiting for us to return to it. You promise? Thanks. Here's a new version, then, of the old song, composed by Miss Priscilla Proctor, please. Should old adventures be forgot, and ne'er provoke a smile, should old adventures be forgot upon this happy isle, for Auld Lang Syne, my dear, for Auld Lang Syne, we'll all return to Capri's shore for Auld Lang Syne. Poor thing, but mine own. There are 2 of us at any rate who won't forget to come back, said Lorna, linking her arm fondly in Irene's as they walked away from the quay. End of chapter 21. End of The Jolliest School of All by Angela Brazel. Read and recorded by VORich24 in the year 2026.